was a cycle of exhaustion and quiet desperation between her college classes and long hours at the cafe. Her only focus was earning enough money to make her mother alive. Her mother had been bedridden for months. Her health deteriorated rapidly, and Ryan had no one else to rely on. It was cold, rainy afternoon when Ryan's world collided with Jungkook. She was rushing through campus, clutching a stack of paper for her class presentation when she accidentally bumped into someone. Her paper scattered across the wet ground and she scrambled to pick them up. "I'm so sorry," she began, looking up only to freeze. Jungkook stood before her. His sharp black suit and leather shoes a stark contrast to the casual clothes of other students. He was an enigma, an outsider who never attended class but had a presence that couldn't be ignored. Dark eye bored into her and his lips curled into a smirk. "Do you always crash into people, or I am just lucky today?" Flustered, she tried to gather her papers. "It was an accident. I didn't mean an accident," he interrupted, stepping closer. "You ruined my shoes." She glared down and saw a faint splash of water on his expensive leather shoes. "I'm so sorry. I didn't see." He crouched down, picking up one of her paper. His eyes scanned it briefly before tossing it back into the ground. Careless and pathetic figures. Her cheeks burned with humiliation, but she bit her lips, staying silent. She couldn't afford to start a scene, not with someone who looked like he could crush her with a single word. As she reached for her paper, his foot came down, pinning one of the ground. "You're in my way," he said coldly. "Move." Her heart pounded in her chest as she stepped aside, and he walked away without another word. She told herself it was one-time encounter, a random act of cruelty, but deep down she knows she wouldn't be so lucky. Jungkook didn't forget her. The next day he appeared at her college, leaning casually against his car near the entrance. His piercing gaze followed her as she walked past, making her skin crawl. In the days that followed, his torment began. He seemed to appear everywhere, outside her classroom, in the library, even at the cafe where she worked. At first it was subtle, a smirk, a snide comment, a mocking laugh, but it quickly escalated. One afternoon as Ryan walked to her locker, she found it open and her book scattered on the floor. Scribbled across her notes in thick black ink was a single word: worthless. Her hand trembled as she picked up the ruined pages. She didn't have to ask who was responsible. Jungkook stood a feet away, watching her with an amused expression. "Having a bad day, Ryan?" he said mockingly. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded, her voice shaking. He tilted his head, feigning innocence. "Doing what? You think too highly of yourself if you think I would waste my time on someone like you." Her frustration boiled over and she clenched her fist. "Leave me alone, Jungkook." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Or what? What can someone like you do to someone like me?" His silence only seemed to fuel his amusement. From that day forward, he made it his mission to remind of her place. The cafe was alive with the hum of a soft conversation and the clicking of cups. But Ryan's mind was somewhere else. Her shift had ended and she stood by the counter gathering her belongings. The weight of her struggle hung heavy on her shoulders. She turned to see Jisoo, one of her kind classmates, smiling warmly as he approached her. His presence was always a brief reprieve from the constant shadow that loomed over her life. "Heading home?" he asked. "Yeah," she replied, forcing a smile. "Let me walk you, it's late," Jisoo offered, his voice gentle. Before she could respond, a deep, menacing voice cut through the air. "She's not going anywhere with you." Ryan's blood ran cold as she turned to see Jungkook standing near the door, his dark eyes locked on Jisoo. He wore an expensive suit, his expression unreadable, but the tension in the air was palpable. "Who are you to decide that?" Jisoo asked, trying to stand his ground. Jungkook didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, his presence suffocating. "I don't repeat myself," he said, his tone calm but laced with warning. Jungkook stopped, Wyan said, stepping between them, but Jungkook's focus remained on Jisoo. Without warning, he grabbed him by his collar, slamming him against the wall. "Do you think you can touch what's mine?" Jungkook growled, his voice low and dangerous. "Yours?" Jisoo managed to choke out, fear evident in his eyes. "She doesn't belong to you." "She does," Jungkook hissed, tightening his grip. "Let him go, Jungkook," Wyan yelled, pulling at his arm. "You're hurting him." Jungkook's eye flickered to her, and for a brief moment there was something raw and unrestrained in his gaze. Reluctantly, he released Jisoo. He stumbled back, gasping for air. "Stay away from her." Jisoo didn't argue. He cast a word glance at Wyan before hurrying out of the cafe. Wyan turned to Jungkook, her anger boiling over. "What the hell is wrong with you?" "What's wrong with me?" he repeated, his voice low but sharp. "What's wrong is watching him try to take what's mine." "I'm not yours, Jungkook," she snapped, tears swelling up in her eyes. "You don't owe me." His jaw clenched and he stepped closer, forcing her to back up until her back hit the counter. "I don't owe you," he said, his tone eerily calm. "Then why does it feel like I do? Why does it make me crazy to see you with someone else?" She glared at him, her chest heaving. "That's not my problem." For a moment, Jungkook stared at her, his gaze dark and unreadable. Then suddenly he leaned in, his face inches away from her. He kissed her. His kiss was brutal, just like him. It's depicting anger, jealousy, and authority over her mind, body, and soul. She pushed him with all her strength. The next day, the world was falling apart around Wyan. Her mother's shallow breath filled the small, dimly lit apartment. The doctor's word echoed relentlessly in her mind. She needs immediate surgery or she won't make it through the month. Wyan sat on the edge of the couch, her hands trembling as she clutched her phone. She had spent the entire day calling hospitals, charities, and distant relatives begging for help. But every answer the same, a polite rejection wrapped in empty sympathy. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at her mother's fragile form. The woman who had once been her pillar of strength now looked so small, so helpless. A loud knock at the door startled her. Wiping her tears away, Wyan opened the door to find the one person she didn't want to see, Jungkook. Faint smirk on his lips told her he already knew why she was struggling. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice shaky but firm. "I heard about your mother," he said simply, stepping inside without waiting for invitation. His dark eyes scanned the room, landing on her mother for a moment before returning to Wyan. "You must be desperate." Instead of leaving, Jungkook closed the door behind him and crossed the room, his towering presence making her feel trapped. "You don't really mean that," he said, his tone calm but laced with arrogance. Wyan clenched her fist. "I will figure this out. I don't need your help." He tilted his head, his smirk growing. "Oh, and how exactly do you plan to come up with that kind of money? Minimum wage at a cafe won't save her." "Wyan, be realistic." Her lips quivered, but she refused to let him see her break. "I will find a way." Jungkook chuckled darkly, stepping closer until there was barely any space between them. "You're wasting time. Every second you spend pretending to be strong is another second she doesn't have. Do you really want her death on your consciousness?" His word cut deep, and Wyan's resolve wavered. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Why do you even care?" she whispered. "I don't," he admitted, his voice cold and unfeeling. "But I care about you." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "This isn't care, this is control," he finished for her, his smirk hardening into a grin. line, call it whatever you want. But the fact remains, I am the only one who can save us. You need me. I will never owe you anything, she spat, her voice trembling. Jungkook's gaze darkened, and he reached out, grabbing her chin gently but firmly, forcing her to look up at him. You already do, Ryan, but let me make this simple for you. Marry me. Her breath hitched. What? You heard me, he said, his voice unwavering. Marry me, I'll pay for your mother treatment. I'll make sure she get the best doctor, the best care. She'll live. This is insane, she whispered, her voice breaking. You can't just. I can, he interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. And I will, but only if you agree. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she pushed his hand away. Why are you doing this? Why me? He stepped back slightly, his expression softening just enough to settle her. Because you're mine, Ryan. Fine, she whispered, her voice broken. Jungkook's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. He reached out, brushing tears from her cheek. Good, you made the right choice, Ryan. From now on, you belong to me. Her heart shattered as his words sank in, and she realized the truth. She hadn't just sold her freedom, she sold her soul to the devil. Ryan sat at the edge of the massive bed in Jungkook's state.